Hi guys, it's me, Mrs. Irish. Today we're gonna do a little station about the geography, the physical geography and the climate in Arabia and how that influenced the Arabs and their way of life. You have two sheets of paper that you're going to need to put into your notebook that we're going to be filling out. The first is this map. This map shows the Arabian Peninsula, and it shows what used to be called Persia and Egypt and some other areas. And we're going to label this map together. So you need that. And you also need this little interactive foldable that we're also going to put in our notebook. And in the middle of the foldable, it says the physical geography of Arabia influenced the Arab way of life in many ways. So you need both of these things for this station. So we're going to take time now to fill out the map. And your map looks like this. So let's do this together. The first thing you need to label on your map is Persia. Go ahead and label that. It's right there. The second thing you will need to label on your map is the Arabian Peninsula. This is also referred to just as Arabia. So either name is correct. You can call it Arabia, or you can call it the Arabian Peninsula like it is here. Either one is accurate. The next thing you need to fill in on your map is Syria. It's in the northern, far northern part of the Arabian Peninsula, and it extends north into this other land area. The next thing you need to label on your map is Egypt. And Egypt is over here. This piece of land right here is actually part of Africa, the continent of Africa. And in the northeast corner of Africa is Egypt, which happens to be right by the Arabian Peninsula. So label Egypt. Now label this little chunk up here. It's called Asia Minor. Asia Minor. Now we're going to label this very bottom little piece right here. There is a little country here called Yemen. Now we need to label this city. It can be pronounced one of two ways. It can be pronounced Makkah, which was the original spelling and pronunciation, or many Muslims and everyone today refers to it as Mecca. So either one is correct, and that's a city here on the western coast of the Arabian Peninsula. The next thing you need to label is the Sahara Desert, which is over here in the northeast corner of Africa. And the fact that this desert is so close tells us a lot about the other parts of the lands that surround it. Most of these areas are very, very hot and very, very dry. And the Sahara Desert just happens to be a very large expanse of hot and dry. So label the Sahara Desert. Now we want to label this little body of water here. This is referred to as the Persian Gulf. At one time, back in the late 80s and the early 90s, the United States was involved in a war called the Persian Gulf War, and this is the part of the world where they were fighting. The Persian Gulf. It's a body of water. The other body of water that's on the other side of the Arabian Peninsula is called the Red Sea. The Red Sea is this strip of water. And then, of course, there's a large body of water down here to the south called the Arabian Sea. Label that. And we have this little strip right in here in the middle between Syria and Persia called Mesopotamia. You learned a little about Mesopotamia in earlier chapters. So label Mesopotamia. We're actually going to go back and leave that there for just a second. If you need to pause the video at this point so you can fill in all of those labels, go ahead and do that now. Once you have everything labeled and it's glued into your notebook, we're going to go on to the next foldable thing that is going to go in your notebook, and it's the one that has the little flaps on it. And when you glue it into your notebook, you're actually going to fold the flaps in first. Like this, and then the other side as well. Fold the flaps in. And you're only going to put glue on this part. You are not going to put glue on the back of the flaps. The back of the flaps are going to remain glueless. Only the center part is going to get glue, and it's going to get glued in your notebook. Now let's go on to filling in our active foldable part. In the middle of your little foldable, it says the physical geography of Arabia influenced the Arab way of life in many ways. Now, if you look at your map, you can see that the Arabian Peninsula has a body of water on either side of it. And remember, I also mentioned that it was hot and dry, and it was mostly desert. The climate was extremely hot and dry, and there was very little water available, and this kept the Egyptians, the Mesopotamians, the Persians, the Israelites, the Greeks, and the Romans from invading the peninsula. So, on one of your flaps, you are going to write down the underlined parts of this statement. That's one thing that influenced the Arabs' life. That their land was hot and dry, there wasn't much water, and so this kept other people away. Okay, this kept other cultures and other communities and other countries out of their land. They didn't want to go there. It was kind of a miserable place, being hot and dry and not much water. So that's on one flap. Next flap. Another thing that influenced the Arabs' life was that they were nomads. Nomads were groups of people that traveled around all the time. They didn't just live in one place. They traveled from place to place to place. They herded animals. They had goats and camels and maybe some sheep and maybe even some cattle. They lived in tents, and they traveled from oasis to oasis. Now, if you remember, an oasis is a watering hole or a spring. And so in order to survive, they had to go from one watering hole to the next watering hole so they could get water for themselves as well as their animals. So on your second flap, you're going to put down that they're nomads, they herded animals, they lived in tents, and they traveled from water to water, or oasis to oasis. Third flap. The Arabs formed tribes in the desert, and you did this to help each other survive because the conditions were so hot, so dry, and there was so little water. By banding together and forming tribes, they survived better. So that's going to go on your third flap. Arabs formed tribes to help one another survive harsh living conditions. Okay, fourth flap. Rival tribes would battle one another for land and water. So we're on the fourth flap here, down at the bottom. So you need to write down the underlined part again, that one tribe would fight with another tribe in order to get a certain piece of land or a certain watering hole. Kind of like if you think about gangs today. They fight over territories or land. They fight over places to hang out. This was very, very similar to the way they did it in ancient times in Arabia. Fifth flap. Many Muslims in Arabia at this time were merchants. They sold things. They had to travel to the bazaar or the marketplace to sell their goods. They would travel in groups called caravans to stay safe and protect each other from being robbed or raided by other desert dwellers. So, Muslims were merchants and they traveled in caravans. This kept them safe and protected. And on the last flap, eventually the Arabs formed communities and built towns along the trade routes. Eventually they figured out that if they lived closest to the roads and the trade routes that they were going to use to get to the marketplace and get to the oasis, that would make their lives a little easier. So they eventually built their towns and communities along these trade routes. And that is your last flap. Again, if you need to pause the video at this time to get your flaps filled out, please do so. So, quick review before we end today. You should have filled out your map, and you should have filled out your foldable. And they should both be glued into your notebook. And this page is going to help you understand how the geography and the climate affected the Arabs' lives. And these 6 flaps on your foldable give you 6 different reasons. You're not going to need to know all 6, but you're going to need to remember a couple. So the 6 flaps on your foldable are going to help you remember 6 things that affected the Arabs' way of life.